Now we move on to the Kantian views on republicanism and cosmopolitanism. So Kant was a republican and a great admirer of French Revolution, and he saw it as a kind of divine commandment and wanted every state or monarchies in Europe to be based on republican principles and constitution, where people themselves decide how their community should be governed and how major decisions should be taken. So he was against therefore all kind of class hierarchies and hereditary privilege that he considered the result of some unjust war in the past. Everyone must be treated equally and with dignity. The reason for such treatment or demand for such treatment is that human beings are rational or a moral agent. That has nothing to do with his class positions or any other forms of hierarchy. They must be treated equally. That is the very basis of republican ideas during the French Revolution. So in his essay, The Natural Principles of Political Order, considered in connection with the idea of universal cosmopolitan history, published in 1784, Kant argues about the need for struggle as indispensable for progress and a form of world government based on republican values. However, this struggle must be carried out within the limits of laws or within the limits of constitution. So in Kant also, as a republican, he did not reduce the individuality like Rousseau at the altar of community. So if you remember Rousseau's idea of general will, that human being must totally submit to the general will, and there is no kind of difference between individual and the general will. So these are a kind of organic connection between individual and the general will of the community. In contrast, Kant do not reduce the individual to the community and complete socialization. He argues that all progress and development happen because of individuality, enviousness and desire for power and possession, and these are something which leads to advancement in science, in technology, in industry and in overall prosperity. So this desire for power or possession led them to exert their faculties in a particular way, and according to Kant, complete socialization of man would lead to a stagnation where human beings could lead a perfect, simple and harmonious life, but without any new development, progress and innovation. So even as a republican thinker, he do not completely reduce the individuality to the process of socialization or to the life of community. So according to Kant, as we have said, that the struggle was the part of all progress and development throughout the human history, but such a struggle must be regulated by certain laws, rules and customs. It also leads to the origin and development of civil society and eventually states, and all the capacities of man that nature has endowed him with could be fully developed in a state which is governed by a political constitution that is internally and externally perfect. So the idea is that the laws and the government must be based on the consent of the people. It has to be a kind of internally and externally consistent. That means the decisions that are taken should be in accordance with the constitution, and the constitution is something which reflects the will of the people as a whole, not a few people or a particular section in the society such as monarchies and elite, but as a people as a whole in their collective sense reflect their will in the constitution, and government must operates in that constitution, and that constitution needs to be internally and externally perfect. He further argues that the civil constitution of every state shall be republican, and that should be the guiding force or a kind of limits to the access of the government and its power. So he argues that civil constitution of every state shall be republican and war shall not be declared except by a plebiscite of all citizens. And during Kant's time, there was a kind of competitive struggle for power, for the acquisition of new territories or new colonies among the European states, and that leads to a kind of militarization where natural resources were mostly spent on preparation of war, and many welfare programs such as education, health and others were ignored. So, the whole functionaries of a state was in preparation for war, in competitive struggle for new territories, power and authority among the other states. Now, in contrast to that kind of thinking, Kant argues that how to create a society where internally a state would be republican, but also in their external relation they can have a peaceful coexistence with other states. Now, one of the major reason of such conflicts, such threat to peace was constant war, and Kant argues that the war is declared by those who have least to suffer as the consequence of it. So, it is the people, the majority of the population who suffer as the consequence of war through their lives or through their resources or property, but they have no participation while a state or its king or the ruler take a decision about war, and most of the time they declare war on the flimsy ground. So, whether to declare a war and peace, which should be preferable option, should be decided by the whole community as such. So, he wants, and this is the reflection of his faith in the republican values and democratic culture, that when it comes to declaration of war, it should be only declared when there is a plebiscite by all citizens. So, it cannot be taken by the few people who enjoy the luxury of their life and declare the war, and people suffer. So, those who suffer the consequences of war must participate in the decision about war. He also argued that the laws that governs a state internally to manage or organize political life among its members should also be the guiding principle for the international order. So, he argued that the laws that govern a state should also govern the international order if peace and harmony are to be maintained, and he further developed this idea in his conception of perpetual peace, and to which now we turn. So, in 1795 Kant wrote an essay called Eternal Peace. This may appear contradictory to you and to many scholars. Title appear contradictory as there is a constant cycle of peace and war in human existence. So, there is nothing like perpetual peace or eternal peace. There is the cycle of a period of peace followed by war, and then again peace, and then followed by war. So, the human existence or the history of human existence is replete with this cyclical nature of peace and war. And then arguing for something like eternal peace or perpetual peace was something like kind of ahistorical or a kind of counterintuitive expositions. But Kant tried to argue that how a state within its territory and also at the international level may attain peace which would be everlasting or permanent by following certain principle or moral assumption that is guided by again the categorical imperative, where the particular is not in isolation from the universal, Therefore, the transcendental ethics in Kant, if applied to individual and also to the state and international order, would create a society, create a condition of perpetual peace and eternal peace. So, if you look at the title, it may appear contradictory, and peace rarely remains everlasting. So, there is a kind of constant threat to peace, and the whole order of the state and its machinery is to maintain the peace, and yet war is something which is inevitable. So, particularly during Kant's time, nation states were constantly at war with each other, and violence was a regular part of life. Kant tries to establish a perpetual peace among the states at the international level, and he wanted the nation first to minimize and gradually entirely abolish the standing armies. So, the very legitimacy and strength of a nation state lies on the fact of its standing armies. So, to achieve peace, first Kant argues that the government should function under a civil and republican constitution, where the war is declared only through the plebiscite. So, it is the people who decide whether they should go for peace or war. Next thing that he argues is that all the state, if they want perpetual peace and eternal peace, first minimize their standing armies and eventually totally abolish them. And he argued that the standing armies of the state excites state to out-rival one another in the number of their armaments, which has no limit. So, this kind of competitive rivalry among nation states to have more and more standing army is a limitless competition. There is no end to that, and yet a state constantly tries to out-rival each other in terms of their standing army, and that is the greatest danger to peace or perpetual peace that Kant is arguing. So, he wants first that all the states should first minimize and eventually abolish their standing armies if they want to have perpetual peace among themselves within their territory and also among the other nation states at the international level. So, Kant argued that rulers rarely have resources for public education and other welfare measures, as all resources of the state are mobilized and kept for the preparation of next war. Thus, he was against all forms of violence and war, and he sees it as a violation of individual dignity and peace. Kant was equally critical of the expansionist regime of European states. So, European states expanded their territory and power beyond their territory in Asia, Africa, America or Latin America. So, Kant was equally critical of European states and their expansions in America, Africa and Asia, and the horrors they committed, the resources they extracted from these colonies, and the way they reduced the aboriginals in these lands to nothing, all at the same time when they fight for piety and republican values at home, resulted in, according to Kant, competitive militarism and ever present threat to peace among the nation states in Europe. So, he is also a critique of the colonial expansion and competitive rivalry among the European nation states to outperform other states within the Europe in conquering new territories, and the kind of horror they commit there and reduce the aboriginals of those lands to nothing. So, the territories in Asia, Africa and America was considered by the European states as open for grabbing. They can come and establish their rule, then extract resources, do all kind of horrors, all at the same time when they were fighting in their own states for greater freedom, for rights of the citizen, or pieties and the republican values. And this seems to Kant internally contradiction in the functioning of European states that leads to competitive struggle among themselves for more and more military might or standing armies, and also a kind of competitive rivalry among other states for the conquest of new territories, and that leads to a kind of threat to the possible peace or the perpetual peace that he is seeking to establish even at the international level. So Kant, however, hoped, like he was arguing about enlightenment, that even in the immaturity conditions of majority of population, yet few courageous individual as a moral agent, as a rational agent, will gradually take the society forward towards the enlightenment age. Similarly, among the nation states, he hoped that the states with the republican constitution and democratic values will create some kind of order at the international level, which would create the condition of perpetual peace or eternal peace. So Kant hoped that the republican constitution and an international order based on republican and democratic values, and this must be free from slavery, bondage or exploitation of any kind. So once you have states with republican constitution, with the values like democratic and the republican values, that is participation by the people in the decision making or in the managing the affairs of the state, when you have those states at the international level and there is a freedom from all kind of slavery, bondage and exploitation, then it would create a condition of perpetual peace among the nation states at the international level. So he argued, and Kant was in that sense a first cosmopolitan thinker in modern times, who argued about a universal government in the form of world republic, league or federation of nation that would transcend the boundaries of the nation states, and that is part of Kantian transcendental ethics, where individual transcend their particular and consider themselves as the part of universal. Similarly, the state should operate on those laws, on those values which will create the condition of perpetual peace or eternal peace at the international level. So that is all on Kantian views on perpetual peace, republicanism and cosmopolitanism.